I don't like doing my own home repairs, and when I made some videos that honestly show how much I don't like it, they seem to help a lot of other guys like me. So I thought it would be good to make this new set of videos. Guys like me have a million questions for the progressive activists that we see on the news, but nobody on TV ever asks those questions. On CNN, the host probably agrees with the activists, so his questions are weak. And on Fox News, the host just tries to make them look bad. Either way, nobody's asking the questions that might actually help us get a feel for where they're coming from, so we might actually understand them a little better. It's no surprise that people who disagree over politics are so angry at each other nowadays. So right before Christmas, me and my brother, who is himself progressive, we drove around the West and did our own interviews. We drove to 22 cities and interviewed dozens of people who support progressive causes to ask those questions that are never asked. We're not trying to change their mind or make them look bad. We just want to understand where they're coming from. These folks were brave, considering what can happen nowadays if you say one wrong thing on YouTube. And we talked about a lot of really sensitive subjects. So just leave right now if these conversations might offend you. If you stay though, I think you'll hear some things you've never heard before and have a better understanding of your fellow Americans. I did. Next, we went to Boise, Idaho and talked to equal rights activist Taylor Hunt. We talked about resistance to Donald Trump, assimilation in the United States, capitalism, and we started by asking her about her involvement in LGBT rights.
I do go to Pride every year to show support for that. Boise Pride Fest is what we call it here. I mean, we do live in a very red state, and sometimes, people in that community don't feel so welcomed in that kind of environment, but Boise is actually a really welcoming and embracing place, and I think that's really neat.
So what do people still find in this day and age that is intolerant of folks, who are LGBT?
Not so much with homosexuality, but things like bisexuality and pansexuality and transsexual rights and things like that are still very much an issue in society. I mean, what people don't seem to realize is that the LGBTQ community doesn't want special rights or extra rights. They just want to be able to do the same thing that heterosexual people can do, like get married and, adopt children and things like that. So it's not special rights. They just want equal rights.
Okay.
So
I would assume then, in your opinion, being LGBT is just another attribute like race or like race. It's not something you particularly choose. Would that be a fair way to describe it?
Exactly. Yeah, to me it is pretty much no different than race.
I could swear there was a period of time very early in the LGBT rights kind of movement where people were describing it as a lifestyle choice. Do you remember that? Or am I just misremembering?
I do. I was young. But I mean, even into my teenage years, people were still calling it, even now, people will still call it a lifestyle choice.
Okay.
Which I don't believe it is. It's just how you are.
Okay. Well, let's move on to other things. So, ever since the beginning of the election cycle, it just seems like everything's been turned up to 11 politically in this country. And I think the biggest issue for people who are conservative like me is immigration. I mean, a lot of observers say, you know what, that's what won Trump the election, that's what won him the primary, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have any opinions on immigration?
I honestly believe that our citizenship process, our immigration process is too difficult in this country. I know there's a lot of people from other countries that try to come here legally, and it's such a lengthy and difficult process, and sometimes these people are trying to get away from a bad situation in their countries. And, we have, the opportunity here for them to have a better life. And I think that's our duty, not just as Americans, but as a global citizen, as humans, to help our fellow man. I mean, I can see both sides of the argument when you have a lot of people coming illegally, but I think that we definitely need some immigration reform, but I definitely don't think we should close the borders either.
Okay. Would you go as far as to say that folks that are immigrating illegally just should stop doing it? It's just a net negative for the country.
I would prefer to see people stop coming illegally just because it causes all kinds of compounded issues. And then it turns into a later on issue where we have issues like with the DACA Dreamers,
Agreed.
you know?
Agreed, yeah.
And then you have situations like the refugees. I definitely think we should help refugees. I know in other countries they had issues with refugees though. So it's like, where do you draw the line, or how do we set up a system to where we can make it safe for our citizens, but still make it easily and more accessible to people from other countries to try to improve on their own lives by coming here?
Some folks on the progressive side will actually say that we just believe in completely unfettered immigration, as though there are no practical concerns. But where do you stand on that?
I'm kind of on the fence on that, but I definitely think, just like anything, moderation and regulation needs to happen. I mean, we can't have just 1 million people pouring in a month. Like, that just can't happen. We can't sustain that. We can't help these people get settled and become a part of society if we're just kind of dumping truckloads of people into a place and say, all right, go ahead, make your life. Mm-hmm. But on the other side, I don't think it should be too constricted.
Okay, great. Yeah. The problem most conservatives have with immigration isn't so much, I mean, maybe we could argue the numbers are too great, maybe we can't, support this, but it's an issue of assimilation. It's a bad word nowadays. People don't like to talk about it because we're teaching in school now that we're no longer a melting pot. We're, a vegetable stew or something where, let's all retain our individual identities, which, anyway, so I won't editorialize on that. But that's kind of what they teach in school nowadays. I think assimilation, becoming part of the American spirit, is very, very important. How important do you think assimilation is in just kind of society getting together, people getting along with each other?
I think it's important to a degree. It's important in the sense that when you move to a new country, you can't expect their laws to bend, according to your culture. If you're going to move somewhere, you should probably look it up and make sure it's a place that you could living in. But at the same time, I also think that we should celebrate different cultures. And if it's not hurting anybody else, we should definitely let people do their thing, live in their culture, dress the way they want,
I agree,
practice the religion they want. But if you're going to move somewhere, you need to be comfortable with living with the laws of the land. And that's not exactly a popular opinion but...
Well, it's the laws. And I would also think it's the end of the social mores, because everybody agrees that the richness of the different cultures in America is one of our huge strengths. But we've also managed to incorporate those without incorporating, the way some cultures treat women, the way some cultures treat the handicapped, the way some cultures treat minorities. Those are things that we lead the world in being, good at that kind of stuff.
In other cultures, in some countries, women are treated poorly, minorities are treated poorly. Like you said, the handicapped are treated poorly. And so that's very important to me. That's why I love this country. I really do. I feel like there's some areas that we can improve. But I also feel like that's why people want to come here, because we are more accepting. It goes back to the everybody's created equal argument. And that's what, basically this country was founded on.
It's been fascinating as a conservative to watch the country's collective head explode when Donald Trump became president. For somebody for folks that have been just as angry as conservatives have been, as I've been, for years and years, it's wonderful to kind of roll this hand grenade into Washington and see him knock things down. What was it from your perspective? Because I'm guessing you don't agree with a lot of his policies, and it's probably certainly not, not many people would agree, with the way he carries himself sometimes, but anyway.
I am not a huge fan of Donald Trump, and I'm not afraid to say that loud and proud. I think that he, just like any politician during his campaign, made a lot of promises that he didn't even intend to keep. But I think the biggest problem for me is that he made a lot of promises to communities I'm passionate about, like the LGBTQ community, and women in general. And he's backtracked on a lot of those promises or a lot of those assurances. And I know that there are several in his cabinet that are adamantly against LGBT rights and not necessarily, and I mean, there's the whole scandals about women and him, and I don't know how many are true or how many are not, but just the fact some of the things he said in the past doesn't make me super comfortable with him.
Okay.
But I know people can change, but I also think that a president shouldn't probably go on a Twitter tantrum every other day.
Right.
So,
are you willing to kind of grant that he does get to do things, push things in the direction that his voters want them to push? Would you support, for example, the kind of monkey wrenching that we see some people say is justified simply because he's Donald Trump and he's saying things that people haven't said for 40 years?
it depends on what you mean by monkey wrenching.
Well, everybody's fine with doing, within the constitutional boundaries, opposing things you don't agree with. But people go farther than that, it seems like, with Donald Trump. People go as far as saying, well, they're Nazis and you should punch Nazis. As though because they find such disdain with Donald Trump, it's okay to do things that really are questionable, ethically, in order to try to stop him. Do you see that? Am I just imagining things?
No, it's a very real problem. I'm a nonviolent person. I don't agree with some of the things that organizations have done during these protests where they're rioting and they're breaking things and they're destroying property and they're hurting people. That's definitely not okay. Which, I mean, it's happened from both sides. Girl got run over, windows got broken, Nazis got punched in the face. And it's all, you hear a Nazi got punched in the face and you kind of giggle a little bit just because Nazis are bad. But at the same time, it's not okay. It's not okay to just punch somebody in the face because of what they believe. It's okay to tell them that being a Nazi is not okay.
Okay, but I mean, I would. Do you actually believe that most Trump supporters, I mean, there's a lot, half the country, do you think it's okay for people to be calling them Nazis and racists?
No, I don't think that's okay at all, because I have friends from all over the scale. And while we don't agree and we will argue about it, they're not racist people. They're not hateful people. They're some of the best people I know. And I know why they voted for Donald Trump. They were tired of seeing the same old thing happen again and again and again. And they wanted change. And to his credit, he is stirring things up, just not in a way I agree with.
Well, thank you very much for saying that you don't think the Trump voters are racists or bad people or something
No,
like that.
absolutely not. Most people just want what's best for their fellow Americans.
Okay. So you've been involved in a variety of interesting activities, the Million Mask March, a lot of good protests like that. And I assume that in some of those you'll find folks that are just kind of full-bore Antifa, let's take to the streets kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Can you describe what you see when you go in these places?
You don't see a lot of that in Boise. I don't know if it's because we're not as populated or just that's not our thing. But for instance, when I did the Million Mask March, we all met up and we marched on the Capitol. But it was that organization is very nonviolent. We use our words, which is what I believe is the most effective, because when you're going out and you're rioting and you're looting and you're hurting people, all you're doing is upsetting the other side, and they want to go out and riot and loot, and it just is a vicious cycle.
If you could estimate what percentage are folks that are, that are taking to the streets, that are condoning violence, that are walking around with sticks. The perception I get is it's a large percentage, but that may just be because that's what the news chooses to focus on.
I think you're absolutely right. It's what the news chooses to focus on. I know plenty of people that go to protests and everything. I'd say it's a very small percentage that actually goes out and does these violent, destroying property, hurting people. I think it's a very small percentage, but like you said, that's what the media focuses on, because that's what I believe that's what they want us to focus on. It keeps the political climate hot, so that way, they keep the two sides angry with each other. Not long ago, there was a concert in this area, and it was a very loudly outspoken white supremacy concert. The bands, they had swastikas tattooed on them, and the lyrics to the songs were very racist and sexist and violent. And there were some people that wanted to go find where they were and, beat it out of them and everything. But instead, I had some friends that organized an event that day to raise money for an LGBTQ charity instead. And I was just so proud of my friends, for taking the nonviolent route, which I think is what we need to start doing more often.
Yeah. Okay. Good. One last question is when President Obama won for the second time, in conservative circles, you heard a lot of people say, well, in the end, it really is more about what you do in your personal life than whoever's happens to be in Washington, D.C. That was kind of how conservatives coped with President Obama winning, is like, hey, just do good in your own job, do fine, you and your family, you'll be fine, right? We'll get through this. What was the mood like among progressives when Donald Trump won?
It was a little bit of a bigger reaction. A lot of people were very devastated. I know a lot of my friends that are disabled or gay, they were very distraught.
If I can ask you though, knowing Trump's history, his whole history, the whole 30 years he's been in the public eye, I mean, gay friendly, palling around with every race creed, dating every race creed. We only started hearing these worrisome things about Trump during the election. Was that just lost on people, that he had a whole lifetime of demonstrating that he's a New Yorker? He got along with everybody in New York.
Yeah, I think it was less about Donald Trump. It was more about the company he keeps. Mike Pence has always been very outspoken against, gay rights. Paul Ryan, not exactly on the gay rights train. It's more about the company he keeps and the backpedaling after he was elected. Like, he went to rallies and held up rainbow flags and told the community how much he was going to fight for them and fight for their rights. Then he got in office and he's like, I don't want to really be involved. And he kind of let his cabinet take the reins, and now they're talking about repealing gay marriage and everything like that. So it was more of a betrayal type of thing, at that. And a lot of people just really wanted Hillary Clinton to win. I honestly didn't want either of them to win, but I knew that was going to happen either way. So
tell me a little bit about, I'm glad you brought that up. Who would have been your candidate that you would have preferred to see?
I would have preferred, honestly, to see Gary Johnson. I'd love to see somebody that's not a Democrat or Republican in the White House. I'd love to see it mixed up that way. But I know that if it does happen, it will not be for many moons.
Okay.
But I would have been happier with Bernie Sanders. I know a lot of people, he made a lot of conservatives really nervous because of the democratic socialism aspect. But I feel like people don't understand enough about democratic socialism. Democratic socialism isn't a ideal situation for me. But out of all of the options that were presented in this last election, it was the most ideal in my mind.
Okay. What do you think of capitalism?
On the one side, I believe in freedom and being able to live your life and be able to make and sell things and, have choices. I think that's really important. But on the other side, I think capitalism is a little harsh for society, especially for, the 99%, the lower income. Capitalism can be really rough. Like I myself, I work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. Because health insurance is very expensive. I have a autoimmune disorder, and so I have to pay for medication and doctor's visits and things like that. And it's very expensive. And that's because medicine has become an industry. And so has education. Like, I would really love to go back to school and get a degree. But education is so darn expensive because capitalism has made it possible to charge thousands and thousands of dollars a year just to take a few classes to get an education. And I really feel like education should be more accessible.
Okay. Just so you know, and I'm not trying to convince you of anything, but conservatives believe that both medicine and education have been ruined by government influence. So I think we're on the same page that things have gone horribly wrong with both of those. And it's anybody who's serving in office should just be ashamed of what's happened in the last 40 years. So.
It's again a snowball effect, and I'm on the fence. Like, I don't consider myself a liberal or conservative. I'm kind of right there in the middle, which makes everybody hate me. But yeah, you know, the conservatives call me a liberal nut job, and the liberals call me a conservative jerk. But I'm kind of on. I think everybody, if they really think about it, is in the middle somewhere. You've got your extremists on either side, but I feel like to really be make educated decisions and have intelligent conversation, you have to be able to see things from both sides. Otherwise, you're just talking to brick walls.
Thank you so much. That's a great way to end it, and I really appreciate you sitting down with us. So ends this interview. I want to thank Taylor Hunt in Boise for giving me insight into someone who's reasonable, peaceful, and loves the country, yet incredibly doesn't agree with me on everything. Gosh, wouldn't it be nice if there were a country where people like she and I could coexist? Hey, please consider supporting the series by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks.